Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron Blade, and I'm the editor, creator, and producer of what you're watching right now, Blade Talk. If you are new here, welcome, and you find this presentation helpful, informative, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. Always appreciate all the support that I am given. So, what do we really know about Islam's prophet, last and final messenger, Muhammad? Well, in this presentation, I'm going to go over 5 things that you may or may not know about Islam's Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad. Let's begin. All right, let's jump right in with some facts that you may or may not know about Islam's own Prophet Muhammad. All right. I'm going to be using various sources from the Hadith, the Quran, as well as the apostate prophets. So let's jump right into the first fact that you should know about Prophet Muhammad. The first thing is that he was a slave master. Okay. Now, although Muslims in modern times like to portray him as someone who gave slaves better rights and emancipated slaves, this is a new perspective and a distortion of who he actually was. Okay. Slavery and slave trade has always been a core part of Muslim society, and Muhammad never ended nor intended to end slavery. In fact, if we research through Islamic sources about Muhammad and slavery, what we see is that Muhammad kept, bought, and sold slaves. He picked and distributed slaves. He carefully picked the female slaves for sexual pleasure, encouraged gifting instead of freeing a slave. Now, to be fair, the Quran does mention freeing a slave is a good deed or an atonement for sin. It's kind of like giving charity, right? But just because freeing slaves is charitable or an atonement for sin, that doesn't necessarily mean that slavery is bad, according to the Quran, okay? And people were not obligated to free slaves, all right? So what we know for a fact is that Muhammad didn't have an issue with some humans owning other humans, all right? The second fact that you should know about Muhammad is that he had interesting revelations. Okay. Of course, Muslims hold that Muhammad had regular revelations from the angel Jibril or Gabriel. The way he received those revelations are a matter of interest. Okay. There are reports that Muhammad himself described revelations, quote, like the ringing of a bell, and that this form of inspiration is the hardest of all. Sometimes the angel would come in the form of a man and speak to him, and he would grasp whatever was being said. According to other reports by his wife and those around him, he would sweat heavily, moving his lips and tongue as if he was chewing on something. He would lay perfectly still for hours. He would breathe heavily and turn red. He would lay down and make loud noises like the snorting of a camel. His loyal follower Umar would cover him during those types of revelations. Now, I don't even know what the snorting of a camel sounds like. And I am no doctor to make diagnosis here, but his divine revelations resemble the symptoms of certain psychological or neurological disorders that come with hallucinations and delusions. We know that Prophet Muhammad, after obtaining his revelations, became suicidal at first, tried to hurl himself off of a cliff. Okay? The third fact that you should know is that Muhammad was a suspected liar. Okay? Muslim and Islamic sources often state that he was trustworthy and a reliable man. Muslims state that he earned these attributes as a traitor and in the internal affairs of Mecca. So he was a traitor. Okay, a businessman, he traded goods, etc., right? Of course, just because someone is reliable doesn't mean that that person can be trusted, right? The Quran, of course, defends Muhammad repeatedly because people ridicule him for his stories and claims. They call him a liar, madman, accuse him of forgery, and retelling ancient stories as if they were original. Muhammad rose to the status of prophethood and warlord, commanding militias, and as you can imagine, that people were terrified to say anything else about him as time progressed. Okay. It is important to note that what we know about Muhammad as a person comes from biographies and hadiths. Okay. Now, the biographies were mostly relied on by oral traditions and came about a century after his death. Okay. As for the hadiths, they are transmitted actions and words of Muhammad and his contemporaries. Okay. The first complete hadith compilation was completed a century after his death, while the most quote unquote authentic compilation was complete 2 centuries after his death. There are many issues with the hadiths, such as many unreliable hadiths exist, and that hadiths can only be rated as authentic if the narrators are Muslims of good character, which under historical standards would establish a bias, right? And they would put the authenticity of those reports under doubt. So who Muhammad really was as a person relies on late accounts that could be heavily biased, right? That will make it hard for one to trust the Islamic idea altogether. All right. I mean, if the only thing you know about Prophet Muhammad is from people that already admire him, revere him, and love him, if that's the only thing that you know, it's going to be hard to be able to mention Muhammad in an unbiased point of view, right? Because they're already sold on the whole mythology and who Muhammad was, right? And of course, we know the old adage that history is written by the victors. And as Muhammad was a military tyrant or warlord, he went from tribe to tribe, conquering them. And, you know, what was essentially said about him, or the truth about who he actually was essentially filtered through him and his contemporaries, right? So it could be heavily biased. The fourth fact that you should know about Muhammad is that the core idea is not only that Muhammad was a messenger, but he was the last messenger sent to mankind. Okay? Now, if we look close here, okay, we can see that the Quran and the Hadith doesn't mean in context that he will be the last messenger and the world will continue for thousands of years, right? If you actually read it in context, the idea was rather Judgment Day and the end of the world was imminent. Okay? It is very near and about to happen, and that Muhammad was the last and final messenger before the end of the world. Okay? According to early Islamic reports, Muhammad stated on multiple occasions that the last day is about to happen. It is closer than ever. He hinted and said that the events of the last messenger wasn't the last day are about to happen. He was in fact very specific, prophesying the imminent end of the world. So Muhammad's title as the last messenger wasn't just some weird title, right? It served that he was the final messenger who comes before the end, making Islam originally a doomsday cult that failed. Okay? Now, the last and final fact that you should know about the last and final messenger was he illiterate or ignorant? To most Muslims and even non-believers, it is a known fact that Muhammad was illiterate, although there are some disputes about this. Okay? Generally, Muslims argue that it is miraculous that Muhammad was illiterate and able to produce a wonderful masterpiece known as the Quran, right? Which contains so much knowledge which can only come from Allah, right? Can only come from a higher being. Okay. There are certain issues about that, such as the Quran only came into existence after Muhammad's death. Okay. And if we analyze certain verses that make no sense, Muslims will try to reinterpret the Quran and deny that the Quran is mistaken about many issues. But I digress. That aside, it is rather unclear whether Muhammad was in fact illiterate. The Quran refers to Muhammad as Ummi, okay, which translated can mean illiterate, but can also mean unlettered, ignorant, or uneducated. The Quran, in fact, uses the term in various ways in other parts of it. Many hadiths report him writing a letter and asking for a paper and pen because he wants to write a note. So although Muhammad being treated as illiterate is a known fact, it is actually unclear and a bit ambiguous. So this title or this word Ummi can be used for illiterate, but it can also be used again for ignorant, right? Now, I am a literate individual, but when it comes to chemistry, I'm ignorant, right? So they can mean different things in different contexts, right? And the fact that Prophet Muhammad asked for a pen and paper to write a note, the fact that he wanted to write a letter. Now, of course, in Islam's defense, it is a known fact that he kept certain scribes around him, right? People that could essentially read and write. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the claims that he made and this idea of Muhammad being illiterate is not exactly clear. So those are 5 facts that you should know about Islam's last and final messenger, Prophet Muhammad. If you found this presentation helpful and informative, do me a huge favor, hit that like button. Do me an even greater favor and subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate all the support that I am given. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and until the next episode of Blade Talk, you all take care.